Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, is now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Chairman Barr expressed a desire to assess how the Federal Reserve performs analysis on bank mergers. This follows the DOJ plans to update guidelines on banking mergers to provide more robust scrutiny. I strongly believe antitrust analysis should be governed by the rule of law and not the individual views of those who, at any particular point in time, head the relevant agency. I'm concerned any change in that analysis that would depart from long existing and widely accepted standards may not reflect actual changes in the competitive environment. Further, we've talked in this committee many times, the capital proposal from the Fed and other financial regulators, on top of other recent regulatory proposals, is bound to lead to some type of consolidation to overcome the compliance burden of these rulemakings. Ms. Tyer, what do you believe will be the net effect of the Biden administration and its regulators sharply increasing the regulatory burden on banks with more than $100 billion in assets, while simultaneously making mergers between those banks more difficult to close?
I think we have a very unhealthy market for bank mergers. As I said in my testimony, the regulators are sending mixed signals. The bank merger guidelines have not been updated since 1995. That's not only pre-internet, that's pre-fax. It's virtually pre-email, and not everyone had email back in those days. The world has really changed, and these bank merger guidelines have kind of been in the air now for almost 2 years and nothing's happening, and it's high regulatory risk for any banking management to go to their board and say, we want to sell. So I think this is going to have an adverse impact. I think we're better off with a healthy bank regional market where the strong can buy the weak. That's going to have less banking crises. I think sharply raising capital on regional banks at this moment is the wrong move at the wrong time. And I'll just stop by saying AOCI is not Basel III endgame. It's something very different. And so revisiting AOCI isn't the same thing as saying all of these other changes. There's not a trail of breadcrumbs from revisiting AOCI to all of the many other changes. I hope I've responded to all your questions.
Yeah, and under the capital requirement proposal, corporate entities must have securities and they must be listed on an exchange, right, to benefit from a reduced risk weighting. So this whole approach ignores smaller non-public companies that rely on banks for funding, right?
I completely agree with that. It ignores a range of companies. We've got some really large, major tech unicorns that are stable that we should be encouraging banks to lend to. Then we have the kind of small and medium-sized enterprises that are the backbone of our economy, particularly in smaller market cities. And then we have my son's micro production company in Los Angeles that probably should get a higher risk weighting.
Right.
But that's probably that's a mini company from a very young guy. But to treat my son's company the same as name your favorite tech unicorn or name a contracting company in Raleigh, North Carolina that's been there for 100 years makes no sense.
Thank you. So in the 1 minute I have left, the proposal from the Fed and the other financial regulators would impose, obviously, huge costs on regional and mid-sized banks with little to no trading books to adopt the governance and data processes. Ms. Petro, can you discuss how the Basel standard just is poorly suited for these smaller banks?
I think they'll be extremely difficult, partly because the new proposals, as you know, impose market and operational risk requirements. And I think buried in the bowels of the proposal is a request for comment on whether or not the market risk rules should apply only to banks which have material market risk. I think that's a really important point, because otherwise for these smaller banks, and this is true also in a different way for operational risk, they're going to be doing tremendous amount of work and ultimately holding unnecessary capital that could go to lending to underserved borrowers for risks they're not even really running, that aren't material to safety and soundness.
Thank you. I yield back.